please put your hands together for the Honourable Senator Nigel Scullion.
Well, thank you very much, Roy, and can I say what a pleasure it is to be with you here today. I would have loved to have spent the entire conference with you, and often it's really good to be in good company. The New South Wales government have got it wrong, as well as the Commonwealth government. We've managed to hold Parliament sittings at this most essential few days. I can't believe that they've managed to stuff that up so comprehensively. I have to say, sitting in the Senate is a bit like pushing a pencil in your eye some days. I'd much rather be here amongst friends. And again, I genuinely apologise. I've had the opportunity on so many other occasions to spend some time with people and understand better the issues that are facing you, and particularly talk to you about the solutions. Unfortunately, I had to duck out of Canberra early this morning. Apparently, I've got to make it back for question time. Another pencil. But look, first of all, can I acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Minda Local Aboriginal Land Council. We're on the lands of the Wonnarua people. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders both past and present. And it was great of Roy to remind us what happened 2 years ago with Les passing and in the way that he passed, and elders like that should be remembered for the huge contribution they not only make to these organisations, but to their communities and to their families and the leadership that they have provided. I'd also like to acknowledge Uncle Warren. I missed his welcome to country, but I'd like to acknowledge that. I'd also like to acknowledge Grand Chief Ed Jong, and to Wendy, and congratulations. I spent much time in your country. I worked in Saskatchewan drilling holes in a very cold and hard ground. I come from the Northern Territory, where it's a lot warmer. We don't have winters there, but what an amazingly wonderful people. I'm probably going to be a bit mischievous now. I just thought every time I've come here, I've been here at the lake all the last 4 conferences that we've had here. And yes, I'm not much at karaoke. I'm more putting things down my throat in other ways. But we've always had a terrific time here. But one of the things I'm reminded of is each time I've come here about the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, and this is not about politics, it's the spectrum. We've got both the Labor representative and the Liberal representative here, and I know both of them are very welded and wedded to doing the right thing. But New South Wales is probably a reminder. Over 46,000 land claims have been lodged. 11,700 of them have actually been determined. 8,641 were refused. Now, a lot of that is historical. Now, the NSWALC legal team appealed 431 of them, and 90% of those 431 appeals were successful. So a lot of precedent's been formed, and they're moving in the right direction. They've also had over 3,000 claims have been granted. But the challenge in New South Wales is the ice age-like approach to actually handing land back. This has already been determined, and I know that Sarah has made great inroads into that, and I know that David, and I'm just reminding you nicely, that this is one of the most important issues. They're low-hanging fruit. This is Crown land. This is land that belongs to everyone and has been determined by the Act to say that this now has to be handed back. And so land is just so important. And later I'll talk a bit about economic development, but it's very hard to develop your own economy if you don't have access to land. So again, this is not only a part of Aboriginal people in New South Wales' cultural inheritance, it's part of the great economic opportunity. Their great economic opportunity. So can I appeal to both political parties in New South Wales as I move around? One of the things I can't fix because I'm a Commonwealth parliamentarian, but we should focus. Now, across all types of parliament, sadly, the Lands Department has been a bit of Jurassic Park where people are still fighting land rights. You know, the reason this is moving on rapidly, people are getting old and retiring, and that's useful. But we can't allow this glacial space to stay that way. And people are demanding there's a sense that we've got to get this done. Now, I'm not belying that bureaucracy has to go and make sure everything's right, but we should focus all our energy. And the Commonwealth stand ready wherever we can. Now, it's not our legislation, not much to do with us, but we still have a wide engagement with economic development, and I think this should be the absolute priority, and we should be able to do this. It's beyond politics. This space is a non-political space. We can play games in other spaces, but this should be beyond that preserve, and it's just fantastic to see Sarah and David, you both here, representing the various views. So, whilst NSWALC really has its roots in land rights, that's how you started, you know. What do you all get together for? Because you had a united phase that your land had been taken and we want it back. So land rights are at the heart of NSWALC, everything that you stand for. But I should note that I've been around NSWALC for long enough to see this slow but significant metamorphosis into other areas. Land rights is still there, and as I said, there is still much to be done. But they've morphed to becoming not only the largest representative body in the country, but to being a trusted partner in the design and in the delivery of major government initiatives. So that evolution is something that I know that other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations value and look to. And I can often, when I say to organisations who are having a punch up over the local giraffe and who owns it, you know, I can say, look, and they say, oh, can we have one of those or one of these? And I say, look, what's happening in New South Wales is that they're getting it in front of these things themselves. They're driving it. I'm not handing over the reins completely, but I'm handing over the power. If they need a hand, they'll give me a yell. But they're doing their own thing. And a lot of people look to the corporate history and the success of the New South Wales Land Council. So I think whether you're talking about when we wanted to deliver this business hub to take advantage of the opportunities for Indigenous businesses and opportunities for Aboriginal employment in New South Wales, we knew that we'd have to have a one-stop shop. So straight away, we looked to a partner with NSWALC. We've made significant investments, and we know that that's going to have a great outcome for Aboriginal people in New South Wales. When I was wondering about, I made a decision that the court never had to tell me that sea rights and saltwater, freshwater country was as much as part of your country and your culture as your land was. I mean, Danny Chapman used to beat me up about fishing rights every day. Thanks for that, Danny. So I didn't need to be told who would I go to, and that's why when we're talking about sea country, we've actually developed those policies and how we might make some investments and adjustment. We did it in partnership with New South Wales. So a lot of credit goes to leadership, and I have to say, Chairman Roy RC, who's one of the strongest advocates for the mob, he's also the co-chair, as you know, of the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council. I mean, he's respected because people like me know that his words, his bond, his handshake means something. And I tell you, he won't let you get away with any bullshit, including the Prime Minister. And I can't reflect on those meetings. But let me tell you, he fights very hard for you, never takes a backward step. You know, he might be my mate, but that friendship doesn't get in the way of his obligations to every single one of the membership of the New South Wales Land Council. It was just last week he asked me up to the Central Coast. He said, Nigel, can you pop up here to talk about some of the issues they're having on the ground about the Glen and about how we need some women's rehab and a whole range of those sort of things. Now, as I said to my staff at the time, I said, look, when Roy's actually asking, it's not really sort of like a request. He's telling me that we need to go there and we need to be able to go and listen in these places, because he knows that this is a point of such urgency and such significance that I'm required there. And he wouldn't ask every day, and so that's why we make that effort. But can I say to all the New South Wales Board, to Anne, to Craig, to Stephen, to Charles, Danny, Peter, William and Tina, you all do a remarkable job of representing your Louks. It's a tough business. I used to be in a representative organisation that represented the commercial fishermen, so let me tell you, we were a pretty punch-on organisation. We all operate on our own as individuals, and it's a bit like, as they say, herding cats. But I'm sure, as I've moved around around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through my life, I know how challenging this can be. But you're so respected, and that should stand as a testament to how successful you are. So thank you so much for that, for all the work that you've done. So I've been working with NSWALC for a fair while. It's great to have the chance to sit down and talk to some of the issues that are important to you, which we do, and we've had so many outcomes from that. Now, I know what really is important is actually backing you in. I'm not interested in you doing things for me. I'm not all that interested in sort of necessarily doing arrangements. I want you doing your thing with your mob. I'll be here. Not me necessarily, but government will be here. The New South Wales government will be there. We'll be there. We're over here. You'll do your thing. That's how it needs to be. If you need a hand, we're just there. So this principle and should apply right across the board, whether you're an organisation, whether you're a service provider. My advice now comes from those people in receipt of the services, and I think that is just so important. We can't be beholden to a whole range of other people who influence us. We have academics, we have all sorts of people who write and have got a microphone, and that's all pretty interesting and important. But fundamentally, it should come down to the grassroots of people whose business it is, whose land it is, and whose services you should be the recipients of. So we need to find that balance. It's a very, very important balance to find. So we know that the best people to decide about your future is you. It's not me, it's not Sarah, it's not David, with the greatest respect. It's you. And I guess this is an opportunity to remind you in New South Wales of the great opportunity you have because of the strength of your organisation. So that's why I've been delighted to partner with NSWALC on some initiatives that economically empower the mob here in New South Wales. And it's been tremendous to watch the conversation about economic development move from what are we going to do in the future to economic development, what are we doing now? And it's happening right now in the present tense. I remember when I was here back in opposition, we were about removing red and green tape. That's right, the green tape. Every time Sarah or David hands back Aboriginal land, the council says, let's have a green zone. Let's meet my quota. And if that isn't possible, they give the new recipients of the land a bill for bricks and rubbish that the council have been dumping on Aboriginal land for years. Now, we've moved ahead with that. We have. And as you know, I've had a fair bit to say about that. And it hadn't awakened in me that it happens right across Australia because it was brought to my attention by all of you. So there's a lot of people outside of New South Wales that should be grateful for the fight that we've been having because it started here. So in 2014, we were here and we were talking about how we could stimulate the Indigenous business sector, but now we're talking about how communities should best place themselves to take advantage of the new economic opportunities that are here today. The Indigenous procurement policy, its genesis was here. This genesis actually was right here in 2014. That was the beginning of a wave of opportunity that hit the mob and lifted us up and moved us forward. In 2012-13, we actually bought 6.2 million, we the Commonwealth, the $1 trillion economy, $6.2 million in goods and service from 30 Indigenous businesses across the country. Absolutely pathetic, completely shameful. And I was reminded of that in 2014. So what we'd done, we'd just locked the mob out of contracts because of capacity. We just found some way. There was no space, there was no room to get in. People said, oh, open market, it's competition. Well, that was complete bullshit. We had just cut them out. So in July 2015, we introduced the IPP. I went to the Mandarins Club. That's the all the secretaries turn up. And they invited me, actually. I think it was a bad mistake. So I let them know that the change was going to be that every one of them had to have 3% of the contracts by the end of that year had to be with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses. A lot of people reflect on how I survived that, how I kept my job, because the Mandarins, the secretaries of every department, many of them rang the Prime Minister and said, oh, I don't know about this bloke, because that was easier than getting on with it. But anyway, I survived. Then they started getting on with it, and when they realised it was possible and how important it was, they became champions, and they are still champions. So I'm not giving them a hard time. I remember it was just a rough start. So since then, since July of 2015, we've entered into 6,800 contracts. 6,800 contracts with over 1,000 businesses. These statistics are 8 months old. And that's worth $1,084 million. Well over $1 billion instead of $6.2 million. And that's $1,084 million worth of new opportunities, and for me, new jobs. New jobs. Now that's not congratulate ourselves as government. Let me tell you, that's nothing to do with that. The genesis of that was here. This has been an achievement of the mob. It has been an achievement of all of you. You're the ones who have taken these opportunities with both hands, and you're the ones who have delivered on time, on budget. There's been no slackening of any of the standards that are required, and you have made that. And I think you have shown all those nerdy wells and the passive racism that belongs in most bureaucracies and in most people, that you have shown them and demonstrated that all you have to do is give countrymen a go and they will do the rest for you. Most importantly, those 1,000 new businesses, and it's a lot more today, that have won contracts have an average Indigenous workforce of 50%. In this room, no one surprises. Countrymen employ countrymen. We're a big family, we know mob. That's who we employ. 50%. Mainstream, 0.5%. 0.5%. So 3% of the population in your business is 50%. It's just an absolutely incredible outcome. I knew that would be the case, and it's just so encouraging that this is getting bigger and bigger. Not an arithmetic rate. It's going up very, very steeply as opportunities are put in front of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses. So this notion too that somehow economic development was somehow a threat to culture and communities, you had to give some things up. Well, of course the mob are going to sort that stuff out. You sort it out for yourselves. It's not for others to deal with. And you have demonstrated that you can do all those things at once. All of those things at once. Now the IPP is just one example, but some other numbers you should be very proud of. You may have heard that the government, we were carrying on about record-breaking jobs in terms of job creation in the last financial year. The economy stuck on over 400,000 jobs. You should know that 40,000 of those were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. 40,000. 10% out of a 3% population. How's that? 10% of the growth out of 3% population. Remarkable. Should be very, very proud of that. So the message over and over again that I champion on your behalf in government, around the cabinet table, is that all you've got to do is give the mob a fair go and get out of the road. We're on the end of the phone, we're standing over on the fence. If you need a hand from us, just give us a yell. We don't need to be there. You can run your businesses and your life and your country. Just give them a fair go, not only meet the challenge, you'll overachieve. Well, I've been in business myself and I know what the opportunities like the IPP and the new standards that we're building into major projects. So we no longer have targets. That's a weird thing. That's like an option. It's a standard. You're building concrete, you need, we got 15 mil Rio, that's the standard. And people say, oh, well, what if I can't get the employment? I said, don't build a bloody bridge. It's a standard. It's not arguable. No one says, what if I can't get the Rio like that? They say, sorry, mate, you're in the wrong business. So no more targets, no more aspirations. We now have a standard. That's what we must all meet. And it's up to you all to hold people to account. If you don't think they're doing the right thing, ring Nigel, or ring David, or ring Sarah, and get back to me. Because these aspirations have been a really easy thing. You can cloak yourself in aspiration, and effectively, it's an invisible cloak because you'll do nothing. So, I think that the Inland Rail, the Western Sydney Airport are going to be fundamental works with NSWALC. Now, as we all know, there's only so much you can do to grow a business with hard work and the sweat of your brow. You actually need capital. And it's very difficult to get capital when it's difficult to borrow against your land in your house, or particularly when you have neither, because home ownership, you've got to have had a job in the past. Historical reasons, having a job is not possible. Or because Aboriginal land is not seen as real land by banks and financial institutions. Whilst that's changing marginally, the fungibility of Aboriginal land still remains where it should not be. Economic development under those circumstances is very, very difficult. That then means that many of the opportunities of the IPP and policies that are creating it, particularly are only really accessible for mob in the cities and the metropolitan area where there's a lot of energy and economy. So by trying to address that, we have the Indigenous Entrepreneurs Fund, the IEF. It's only available to Indigenous businesses in regional and remote areas. It deliberately targets those things with even hard work will still be out of touch. Big one-off capital equipment, whether it's a tractor, it's a hot dog van, it's a hairdresser fit-out, cement mixer, a grader, that might be the difference. But if we can help you into that, you can sort other things out. Now, it hasn't been around for long. We've already invested in 85 Indigenous businesses, and that investment in infrastructure is worth about $31 million. All of those have come with a package. Every single one of those has now won contracts, is now employing more Aboriginal people. And it's very, very successful. But as I've said before, we know that the best way to drive change is through empowering you to be at the wheel. And they're not just words. I've delivered on my commitment to partner with you on what's important to you. As you'll be no doubt aware that in June this year, very excited to sign up an agreement with the NSWALC to design and to deliver Western Sydney Indigenous Business and Employment Hub. Now, this hub is the first Indigenous business and employment hub to be implemented under our Indigenous business sector strategy, and it commenced operations in mid-July this year from its interim premises in Parramatta. So this hub is all about my experience of, we've got an airport to build. Yeah, no worries. All right, hands up all those who've got a construction certificate. No one there. All right, white fellas will do it. We'll bring in contractors. So we're getting well ahead of the game. We know what the story is, whether there's mischief or not. But we know historically what we've got to avoid. So we now have a one-stop shop to help the rest of the mob meet the standards and their obligations. We're just being helpful. So a one-stop shop. When people say, oh, I'm not sure I can meet that, I say, just go down to the hub, mate. Just go down there. And you better get in early because there's going to be a fair bit of demand. So employment advice, business, for the mob it'll be about training, it'll be about ensuring that whether you're at Darubbin and you have a fair bit of sand, we'll be making sure we put sand with cement mixers, so it's not only about business enterprise, it can be about resources. And doesn't matter where you are in New South Wales, if you've got a product to sell, or if you've got labour for hire, if you've got a business that you want to go and run, you now have a hub where one of the largest investments in infrastructure across Australia is going to give you access. So it's important. You've got to walk the talk. You've got to have a system. And can I say thank you to the board and thank you to NSWALC for designing that with the government. And I'm sure that in and of itself will ensure that it works very, very well. So the other thing the hub's going to do is actually be able to forecast when work is coming up. So there's a pipeline coming up. We know it's in 8 months' time. We'll have the specifications. And the translation for the specifications, I don't care how round the pipe is. What I want to know is how many people are required to put it in the ground, what the grade of sand is under it, so we can put opportunities from around New South Wales and we can say, well, start a business. We've got a contract. We can get this contract. It's long enough. We don't have the capacity. Well, go into a joint venture. Supply nation, joint venture, make sure it's kosher. So that's what this is going to do, and it's a first, and it's a clear demonstration of government's commitments to doing things in partnership with NSWALC. I'm pleased to advise that we currently have legislation before the Parliament that aims to expand the role of the Indigenous Land Corporation to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people conducting, as I've indicated earlier, activities in both freshwater and saltwater country. As we all know, as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, you can walk down the beach and it doesn't end at this weird area that the Westminster system has dictated, that land ends here and something else belongs there. That's not the way of the mob. So this is going to create opportunities. So instead of the ILC only investing in a cattle yard or this or that, they can actually also invest in a jetty or a ship or a boat or a maritime process, which was weirdly excluded in the past. There's a whole range of opportunities in sectors like fisheries and in aquaculture and tourism that can be now accessed. And that was the clear message that I got here, that Aboriginal people, whether you come from the desert to the coast, your people don't stop with the land ends, and we needed to make that change. You should have the right to pursue economic development right across your estate, which includes the wet parts. So that's why I've also provided, and they say, well, there's a bit of a divide. How is it that we can get access to a fishing licence, mate? They don't give them away anymore. I said, no, they don't. So that's why I provided. You know, Danny has stopped belting me, and maybe this is the reason, but I have provided the Land Council with $5 million to deliver New South Wales Aboriginal controlled fishing fund. Well done. Now, it's no secret that the Land Council is best placed to work with the communities and take advantage of the economic opportunities where they are. So this fund will complement the Aboriginal Fishing Trust Fund provided by the state government. Can I thank Minister Mitchell for that? Thank you for that leadership and for Niall Blair's commitment to this important work. Again, if we can get more Aboriginal people into the world of business, then we know they are going to employ more Aboriginal people, which is going to contribute significantly to the economic prosperity not only of Aboriginal people but of New South Wales. It is just so important that communities are at the centre of service delivery and of decision making, and that's why I want to talk to you about an area that I'm constantly on the hunt about. Job active, that's the process in metropolitan, outer metropolitan, many parts of regional New South Wales that I'm working with the Minister for Employment to make sure the countrymen get a better deal. It's culturally incompetent, it doesn't understand and deal very well, it's highly regulated, the people who are in the system are not Aboriginal people by and large, and I don't think we're getting serviced anywhere near as well as we should. And I'll continue to report on that. The areas I'm responsible for in CDP, sadly I'm still seen to be fighting academics, the unions, and currently unfortunately the Labor Party. I'm not sure how firm that is. All I'm motivated by is giving more control to local organisations and communities, and making sure that communities are at the centre of service delivery and of the decision making. So my reforms to the Community Development Program, so through my reforms, which are currently before the Senate, I'm focusing on finding local Indigenous providers and I'm focused on local community decision making. So these reforms are just basically focused on a simpler and fairer system driven by the communities. So there'll be almost no Centrelink, and bushing of Centrelink was a big priority. Local providers and communities will be able to use their discretion to determine what's an appropriate working day. They'll know what cultural and family responsibilities people have to attend, things that Centrelink could never contemplate or understand. Now, there has been some questions about whether local Indigenous organisations have the capacity to take on these roles. Well, under the IAS, when I started, there was 35% Aboriginal organisations. There's now 55%. Let me tell you, they're doing very well. And what about the 1,000 businesses I've just talked about? There's probably another 30% on top of that. They're doing fine. They're doing fine. And why is it that countrymen are not allowed to fail? They're not allowed to have the opportunity to get it wrong. We all get it wrong. So to those who say, I don't think local Aboriginal organisations have got the capacity to take on these roles, well, give them a go. Stand with them. Support them. Provide them time to pick up the capacity. So this should not be an impediment. So rather than copying these one-day penalties or sitting on the phone forever to Centrelink, job seekers will receive intensive support from their local provider in their local community. You won't have to talk to anyone that you can't walk to. And they're going to get support to overcome barriers. They're going to ensure that they're assessed continually and properly, understanding their requirements and getting the best shot at engaging and winning a job. So as part of this package of reforms, it also includes 6,000 subsidised jobs. 6,000 subsidised jobs. Now, whether it's with the Land Council, with local Aboriginal organisations, with the health sector, with the education sector, we're moving people off welfare into paid work, and that was a fundamental part of the original CDEP. Top-up. Well, this is a fair bit better than top-up, but these will be full-time, superannuated jobs. Now, these are rolling 2-year positions, so over 2 years there'll be 6,000 go out, and as one drops out, and the employer takes over after 2 years, as they drop out that end, a new one goes in this end. So there will always be 6,000 subsidised jobs in a CDP area. And it's sad when we have to look to history and the past to try to get it right. But I think the model that so many of you talk to me about as CDEP, you can fiddle with the edges, but there's not work there. You know, so there'll be 6,000 constantly new jobs and families with a proper income, and I think that is an absolutely fantastic initiative. We're going to see a reduction of the number of penalties significantly, more jobs across remote Australia, and more support for most vulnerable job seekers. I don't want people asking to go to work and make some sort of a contribution when they don't have that capacity. So, again, I'd welcome everyone's thoughts on how we can make these reforms achieve the very best outcomes for remote communities whilst it's before the Senate. I'm currently struggling for the numbers in the Senate, so I'm not going to stick it up if it's going to get belted around the head. So I'd look forward to your support from that. So I see NSWALC as an important partner in this work. You've played an important role in the days of CDEP. So subsidies, local control, flexibility of hours around family and culture, respect for the cultural obligations, removal of Centrelink. So we're going to be able to deliver on these reforms. I'm currently being opposed by a political collective of Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney. But in any event, we shouldn't wait for politics to make a change. I'm very keen to get your views and work in partnership with you. Again, thank you so much for your time, for your invitation to be here. It's great to be amongst friends, and I really wish I could have spent a few nights up here with you and really enjoyed the conference. Thank you so much.
Can we give another big round of applause for the Minister for NSWALC, Federal Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Nigel Scullion. Okay, I'd just like to call James up to the stage because with technology, we've got a couple of questions. And if you've got a question that you would like to ask each of the ministers, then please, there's microphones there, make your way up and We've got time, I think, for about 3 questions. And then, but before we go to questions, we'll get James to just read out what you've actually put up on the, what was it, James? The live board or whatever? Event poll. Gee, we're getting this technology, eh? All I can get on is Facebook because I want to see what everyone's doing. All right, James.
Thanks, Chairman. So look, we can't ask all the questions, and we're going to get to these questions both at this conference as well as in following up with ministers' offices. There's some questions that have been asked to ministers which are not the minister's direct portfolio, and we'll get a chance to talk about some of those things like the AHO in other panels where we've got representatives coming along. So the one for Sarah Mitchell, Minister Mitchell, is a question from Wonnarua. Sarah, a possible change to the AURA would be to change the section on land claims not being registered if there's a registered native title claim over the area. Surely it would be better to register and hold the land claim until the native title claim is determined. If successful and land granted to claimants, the land claim fails otherwise if the native title claim falls and the land claim can be resolved. I think this is a question about possible reforms to Section 42 of AURA. So, Minister, thank you.
So we go on? Yes? Thank you. Thanks, James. Look, it's a good question, and I think one of the how do I put this? One of the, not the frustrations, but one of the interesting things about being Minister for Aboriginal Affairs is that you have to work very closely with a lot of other ministers that have different areas of responsibility that overlap. And land claims is interesting because obviously even though I am Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and have responsibilities for the AURA Act, I don't determine the land claims. That sits with Paul Toole as Minister for Lands. But one of the things that I think where there's opportunity for reform in this space, and ideas like this that are brought forward at a conference like this, is with the 5-year review that we have of the AURA Act. We had the most recent one last year, and I think the relationship with NSWALC about that as well. My understanding, and it predated my time as Minister, but that the last review was fairly comprehensive and there was quite a bit of change, whereas this one was a little bit more overarching in terms of, the basic principles still in place and what are the things that we need to work on. So there's the capacity through that, but we're also doing work with organisations like NSWALC, the Registrar and others about what space there could be for change. So I think it's a good suggestion, a good question, and happy to have a look at what can be done.
Thank you, Minister. One for Minister Scullion. Nigel, why can't there be a representative Aboriginal person on every standing committee? NSWALC is a state representative body of councillors who would be appropriate for New South Wales. It would be the gatekeeper and a voice without setting up a new tier of government.
Well, NSWALC is actually represented on at 2 levels. Well, first of all, at the highest level of the advisory council to the Prime Minister, but at another level where the co-chairs actually have been present and report to the IPC, which is Cabinet. Prime Minister is co-chairs between myself and the Prime Minister and Cabinet. I don't know of any jurisdiction before have ever had those key representatives inside Cabinet. And I can tell you, at every level of government, we also have the IPCs to ensure that every other member of Cabinet, they are there to take instructions from the Prime Minister and myself, because I have 7% of the budget, they have 97% of the budget. And Aboriginal people are all Australians, just a bit of a reminder, a bit of a tip to the willing. And so the actual processes and services have to be very thoughtful. Every single department, from Defence to Human Services, need to ensure that they're held to account, and that's exactly how we do it. But if there's any specifics about that you don't think you're getting representation on any particular area, please let me know.
Thank you, Minister. Now, the old with the new, we're going to go to the old version. So if there are any questions, we're going to take 2 questions. They've got to be very short and to the point, not statements. 2 questions, first hands to go up. I think I have a taker here already, Lynn, And there was a hand that went up first over here, so I'm going to go over to Robin. So Lynn, good morning.
Thank you. Thanks, James. My name's Lynn Trindle. I'm the CEO of Narrabri Land Council. I'm also a Biggamore woman, and I've lived on Gomeroi land for 56 years. Forgive me. I have a pig, and the pig's there for a reason. A couple of concerns that I have, and this is going state and federal. Firstly is in relation to the cultural heritage reforms and how the language bill was pushed through prior to those reforms that were supposed to be pushed through as well. Language is a part of our culture, regardless of where we come in this country, full stop. And it should be, and it should have been, part of the new cultural heritage reforms. I have a lot of pros and cons in relation to the cultural and heritage reforms. In relation to, for instance, the Commission. There's a lot of Aboriginal people out there who would not like the aspect of granting destruction of property, like the current Secretary for OEH has. My husband is a traditional owner. If he sat on the local commission to make decisions within the Wonnarua Country where we live. Now, if you understand this country, we are bound by mines, by gas, by pipelines, by inland rail, by Artec and everything else, which means that our job will be part of working with local government to approve or disapprove DAs. Now, for my husband to sit on this panel, if he was selected, and I've made this concern to various people within New South Wales, if he had to make a determination of giving right to destroy artefacts on that land, it would bring him undone, because we as Aboriginal people are there to protect our culture and heritage in our sites. A lot of people asked me why I work with industry. The industry has to have someone watching.
Auntie Lynn, I'm going to have to get you to ask the question.
Okay. So the thing that I'm saying is that it shouldn't be rushed, and all views should be taken on board in relation to traditional owners, land council people, knowledge holders, as well as everything else. And language should be incorporated in the new Cultural Heritage Reform Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Lynn. Minister, did you want to respond?
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for your comments. It's interesting. Some of you probably know I'm from Gunnedah. That's where I was born and raised, and that's where I live now with my family. So I know the area very well. And I think you've just sort of reiterated in your remarks exactly where the challenges are with the work we're doing with cultural heritage. I take your point about language being part of culture, and but the reality is that legislation has gone through separately. But the work on the reform is important, but it's complex, and we need to do it, but we need to get it right. And some of the issues that you've raised have been ones that have been raised with me by organisations and by individual land councils as well. So we've got to keep having those conversations to get it right. I'm really happy to come to Narrabri and spend some time with you and your land council, and that goes for everyone here as well. But these are things we need to talk about and work together to get them right.
Thank you, Minister. Robin, and you better have a question. Over here, it's the one mic.
Yeah, just in relation to the 10%, the procurement policy. In 2010, DAA had a procurement policy which was 10%, and now it's dropped down to 3%. Why has it been a drop in procurement policy in relation to Aboriginal procurement? And the other question was, in your capacity, what capacity is there for Aboriginal people within the water market through the new bill for Aboriginal people to be engaged, because there is a lot of water that is owned by foreign corporations, and as the First People we haven't got really any right. We've got a 10% which is unusable in a sense, and then we've got 10% economic, which you can use for a veggie garden, but you can't trade with it. So we seem to be disadvantaged in relation to our ability to be able to enter that procurement through a water program, and I think there needs to be some sort of relationship in relation to the ministers and how we be engaged in the water. There is problems with Artesian Basin at Werris Creek. They've tapped into the Artesian Basin and the river's running backwards there. I don't know what we're going to do in relation to some of that, but if they stuff that, we're stuffed. So, you know, there is a few issues. And Nigel, we talked to you about the IPA over cultural heritage sites within New South Wales. That hasn't moved forward.
Robin, I'm going to get you to wrap it up. We do have a session on water and on those other issues.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just briefly, starting with the water part first, I know that there's a good relationship between NSWALC and Noel Blair as the Minister for Water, and the concerns that you're raising are valid, and again, they're things that are raised with me as well that we'll continue to work with you on. In terms of the procurement, we've got our Aboriginal participation in construction policy, which might be the one that you're referring to, that still exists. That's for sort of the bigger projects, but the APP, which is our new one for all government goods and services procurement, Nigel spoke about the federal one, and it's modelled on that, and it's more broadly. So there are a couple of things happening in the procurement space, and that might be where there's some confusion about figures. So.
Oh, look, I'll have to get some more specifics back to you, Robin. Dorrigo's treating you well, mate. Could I just have a quick opportunity just to say, Lynn, look, the issue of languages is tied in with everything. You know, we've got this process we call reconciliation, like reconciling the mob with the people who came here. You know, it's very difficult to reconcile something if one side doesn't understand what they broke and took away. So I'm working with Marshall Langdon down in Melbourne to have resources available so when every Australian leaves, by the time they leave primary school in their region, they will have a good understanding of what life was like as much as we can understand pre-contact, pre-European contact. We can have as much of an understanding as we can about what happened in contact. Remember, it didn't all happen at once. It was like a bushfire, trickled through the country, different things 50 years later. And then what we want to know a bit about conventional Aboriginal life and Torres Strait Islander life. Most importantly, the legacy by the time you reach primary school is you'll have to have a broad knowledge of language. Some, you know, introductions, language names, a lot of the nouns, a lot of the bushes, all of that sort of thing. So that it's far more interesting, in my view, to learn about the pre-contact culture of Australia and the current culture in Australia than it is to learn about the bloody pyramids, where serial desertification of land, or in Peru. That's what I was taught. But it's far more interesting to hear about one of the most comprehensive and complicated, sophisticated cultures in the world. So we're well advanced, and language is going to be a fundamental part of that. So thanks very much for the reminder.